Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain. We're here, we are nerdy for the birdies. Training camp continues, and we have a lot to talk about, including a trade that went down Monday night that has some very interesting implications, and we also have a game coming up tomorrow. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, of course, we're going to start off with the trade, where the Eagles send Thomas Booker IV to the Raiders in exchange for Jacorian Bennett. We don't know what draft compensation was included in this deal because that hasn't been announced yet, but I am curious to see what it looks like, because you can't technically just trade a player for a player. You have to throw in like a random 7th round pick or something. But this is an interesting trade for both sides, and there's a lot of interesting implications. Starting off with the fact that the Eagles traded for a corner that was drafted in the 2023 draft class in the 4th round, one pick before Kelee Ringo. And we talked about it last week, that the battle between Kelee Ringo and Adoree Jackson has been back and forth. It's been, big contests, and we're just not sure who's really winning it. Neither one has really edged the other one out. I wonder if this is the response. This is someone who has 11 starts in his career. This is someone who has played 24 games in his career. It has actually been pretty solid if you look at a lot of the stats and metrics. He's an outside corner, pretty much. Jacorian Bennett's a very interesting prospect. I remember definitely researching him for the draft a couple of years ago, but it's going to be interesting to see how he fits in with this defense. If he's able to crack that spot, is he a depth piece? I would be very surprised if he never mixes in with the first team. I mean, Eli Ricks is getting first team reps. Like, we've seen a lot of guys mix into that spot, and I just wonder, maybe they're not exactly thrilled with what's happened, and who knows? The games haven't happened yet. We'll see. He's not going to play this week against the Bengals. I'd be very surprised if he did. But it's going to be very interesting on that end of things for the cornerback spot, but also for the defensive tackle room with the trade of Thomas Booker, who was a pretty solid guy. Like, they didn't just cut a guy here that was not going to make the team. He wasn't that good. Like, Thomas Booker is a solid player for this team. He just ended up being DT5 in a very loaded DT room. And it says a lot about the room, and especially one player, Gabe Hall, who barely missed making the roster last year. He made the practice squad. He was a UDFA last year. Now he has a chance to make the team. So they must really like what they've seen out of him. I've heard he has had a pretty solid camp. We'll see more of that in the games coming up as well, in the public practice. So I'm intrigued right now. I am very intrigued to see what that means for the D-tackle room and the cornerback room. So, a couple of other training camp observations of the past week, and that's really the improvement of the offense. And originally this segment was going to be like the ups and downs of the offense, but based on the last few days, I would say the offense is kind of swinging back into their favor. And really what happens in preseason training camps is defenses are very typically ahead of offenses. Offenses are installing, they're learning, they have specific things they need to learn how to do, and they have to practice executing it. Defenses are kind of more in the go hunt mode. Not that they don't have their own things to execute, but when it comes down to it, defenses is about go get the ball and go stop them. And if you can do that, then you'll win a lot of reps. And that kind of during the end of last week into this week, it looked like the defense was beating the offense. The last few days, though, the offense is getting its own lick back. We're coming off of a day today. Jalen threw 5 touchdowns, had 1 turnover. Nice bounce back day for the offense. It sounds like they were doing a lot of red zone work, but still, though, the offense, it's competitive, and, the offense hasn't been perfect, partially because of injuries. AJ's currently out, Devontae missed last week, now he's back, so guys have come in and out of the lineup, but this is good work for the offense to struggle. And we all remember last year when Jalen had that camp when he threw like 300 passes without throwing a pick, and then eventually threw one towards the end of camp, and everyone's like, oh, he's going to be perfect this year. And then he threw like 2 interceptions in the first game, and they were pretty bad interceptions. I like the back and forth nature of things, because you don't want one side of the ball just outright dominating. You need that consistent back and forth nature. You need that for growth and practicing and learning what you can and can't do. I don't mind interceptions in camp, in all honesty, because it means you're trying something. right? It means you are trying to make difficult throws, difficult reads, difficult plays, and I think that makes it interesting. So with that, it's nice to see the offense get better. And third observation is something I never thought I would ever say about the Eagles. Linebacker is a strength of this roster. And I'm saying this with Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean not practicing. Those were your starting linebackers last year. Bond will be healthy by the time the season starts. Nakobe, we'll see. But Jahad Campbell's had a really good training camp. Smile Mondon's had a really good training camp. Jeremiah Trotter Jr.'s had a really good training camp. These are all guys that have mixed in and have looked really, really good playing linebacker. I believe even Lance Dixon's looked pretty solid, too. That's another name I've heard thrown around. So the linebacker depth on this team is really, really good. That, unfortunately, a guy like Nakobe Dean probably won't be a starter this year. He's going to be a special teamer, a depth piece. And that's like your fourth or fifth linebacker right there. Like, there are a lot of teams that wish Nakobe Dean was a fourth or fifth linebacker for them. You know, that's the kind of situation that they're in. So it's going to be really fun to watch these guys in preseason, how they look. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, linebacker seems to be a very good group for this team. And really the final observation I have here is, are we looking at potentially a Moro Ojomo breakout season? Now, if you look at advanced stats and metrics for Ojomo, you'd notice that he's actually a lot better of a pass rusher than people would realize. He has a very high pass rush win rate for the amount of snaps that he has. He just never really finishes with sacks, and that's why nobody really pays attention to him. He didn't get his first career sack until the playoffs this year, so he technically doesn't have one in the regular season. I expect that to change very quickly, because he has been disruptive again. Going up against Tyler Steen, going up against Landon Dickerson. And I just think to myself, like, man, like, it reminds me a lot of 2021 Javon Hargrave, when that summer before this season, and a lot of people just kept saying, like, the player of camp was Javon Hargrave. He's like that player of camp, and he came out and he was like really good first few weeks of the season. He kind of cooled off, and then he got better towards the middle of the season again, and it's like, he was really, really good. And if Moro Ojomo, being a 7th round pick, is anywhere near what 2021 Hargrave was, which by the way was a Pro Bowler, you got yourself a stud. And that was a 7th round pick right there. So I'm really excited to see what he does. Speaking of excited to see what they do, I have a watch list of players that I am excited to watch in the preseason. I actually didn't go with any rookies for this one, because I feel like rookies are the default, but I picked one player from every position. So starting off, I have DTR here, and the reason why I went with him is I'm very intrigued. I've heard a lot of positive things about him in camp, and I remember in preseasons past, in fact, even playing against us, he had a pretty solid preseason as well. And I'm just curious to see what he looks like. I'm not sure what chances he has of being the third quarterback for this roster. I think Kyle McCord might get it just due to roster politics, being that he was drafted. But if he looks good enough, he might be able to, fetch the Eagles a pick at the end of camp. Or who knows, maybe he is good enough to outright make the roster. Who knows? I'm really curious to see what he looks like. Elijah Cooks seems to be the wide receiver of the week in Philly right now. He's the guy that a lot of people have talked about as another one of these back end of the roster receivers breaking out. So I'm curious to see what he looks like. There's been a lot of them, Darius Cooper, Giles Jackson, Terrace Marshall. Like, they've all been guys that have flashed at various points, but I'm going with Elijah Cooks for right now. I'm curious to see what he can do and how good he can look. I mentioned that linebackers were a strength, and I'm going to talk about Jeremiah Trotter Jr. again. I'm very curious to see what he looks like. If there is a situation where Campbell doesn't play week 1, which I'd be surprised if he doesn't at this point, I'm curious to see what Trot looks like, because I think he's had a really good camp, playing next to Bond at times, playing next to Campbell. He's been pretty solid, and I'm really curious to see his growth from year 1 to year 2. And again, this might be your 3rd or 4th linebacker, and if that's your 3rd or 4th linebacker, you're in a really good situation. So, curious to see what Trotter does. Similar with Sidney Brown. He didn't have a camp last year. He was rehabbing his torn ACL. He's gotten a lot of the first-team safety reps. I'll be very surprised if Cooper DeJean dresses for Thursday. I don't think starters are going to play. But I'm curious to see if Sidney Brown plays. I think they'll get him reps at safety. I'll see how many of those reps he does get. But I'm curious to see him go up against the Bengals, which maybe his brother will play in that game. He'll get a big tackle against him. That'll be fun. And last but not least, Josh Uche. I'm going to put down Uche here because he's had a really solid camp as well at edge. And, this is someone that in 2022 had a big breakout season, but outside of that, his career has been very quiet. And it sounds like there's, little shades of that breakout happening. But let's see it on the field. Let's see him going up against, if he gets to line up against Joe Burrow this week. Because the Bengals are playing starters. That's going to be pretty fun. So anyways, this is Bird Braid. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy today. I'll be back with you guys after the preseason game. We'll be able to talk then. Anyways, fly Eagles fly. See you around.